Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sriti. I teach at Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities at Jindal Global University. This talk has been organized by our research constellation on transitional spaces, culture, and media studies under the Office of Interdisciplinary Studies, Ideas at JGU. And it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Rituparna. She is an assistant professor of sociology at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati. Her research interests lie in exploring questions of culture, food, gender, media, and pedagogy. She is also passionate about making academic knowledge accessible to the public. She's one of the co founders of Doing Sociology. It's a website you all must check out. It's an academic blog dedicated to promoting sociological consciousness among students and young scholars. At present, she's also serving as the associate editor of the South Asian region in Society. It's a journal published by Springer Nature that explores the latest scholarship on the central questions of contemporary society. Today, she'll talk to us about the politics of food and technology in urban India. And I'll quote from one of her articles, which says, "The digital has entered our kitchens and dining tables in a big way, or our kitchens and dining tables have entered the digital in a big way." So, Rituparna, I invite you now to share your insights on understanding this relationship of food and digital space. You can take about 40 to 45 minutes for the talk, and then we can open it up for questions and reflections. It's my humble request to all the listeners to please keep their microphones off during the talk to avoid any disruptions, and we'll invite you for questions after she finishes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shriti, for that generous introduction as well as for having me. I'm thankful to the Ideas and the Nazariya series for this opportunity. And I'm going to share my screen. I think this is visible, right? Yes. So, yeah, let me quickly start. I'll try to keep myself to 40 minutes and then have as many questions as we can. So, when we talk about food, automatically it gathers a lot of interest, and there's a lot of expert opinions as well because people like to talk about food, and especially in India, there's so much that happens around food, be it, community participation, ideas of love, romance, even hate to an extent. And with the entry of how what we call the digital into this foodscape in various forms, one can see that the social has been transformed and also modified in different ways. So, as a sociologist, my primary interest stems in from looking at how the social and the digital intersect. So I have been working on food for a long time now. In fact, my MPhil thesis, which I submitted in Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2016, was on food. But I took a break during my PhD, and after my PhD submission during the pandemic, I sort of returned to the thesis that I had written as well as some of the questions that I was exploring. Reasons were manifold, but one of them was also that the pandemic gave us this opportunity to reflect on a lot of things. Yes, as a middle class woman, it also meant I had that privilege to, think and reflect on many ideas that had already been written on, as well as newer things that were happening. I was also noticing that during the pandemic, there was a picture of binaries and contrast. On the one hand, you had these representations of banana bread, of dalgona coffee, and pictures flooding our social media feeds in terms of, middle class innovations, luxuries. Whereas on the other hand, there were also photographs and pictures of people having nothing to eat, or rather finding it very difficult to make their ends meet. Midday meals in schools had become erratic. And I especially go back to this one photograph of some migrants who were run over by a train, and there were some rotis lying on the railway tracks because they were having their lunch, or rather, finish their lunch and then, not pack the leftover foods. So these ideas of how the digital sort of captured these binaries of food started fascinating me, and I had started also working on what today we know as ordering in at a very similar point of time as I was trying to wrap up my PhD journey in the hostel. Now, during that period, what was interesting is that the kind of food that we were eating in the hostel was a fixed menu that would be set by the hostel authorities. But for a lot of hostelers, they were already beginning to order in, not just from outlets inside the JNU campus, but also outside. So interestingly, till around 2019 or 18ish or so, a lot of us would order from these outlets within the campus itself. But some things had started changing post 2016, in which an economic activity actually played a role in how we also started thinking about the digital mode of ordering in. So let me go back a little and talk about demonetization. And as many of you might remember, it was a significant economic moment in the history of Indian economy in the past few years. And what it led to is an anxiety about, not having enough cash amongst particularly not just young people but also migrants. And I was one of them who was living in that community of hostelers. And then we realized that cash was something which was not very possible to rely on, and we started shifting to these digital modes of payment. It was in one of these moments one day when we realized that if we paid using Paytm, and Google Pay had not yet entered the conversation in a big way as we have it today, there were many offers that restaurants outside the campus gave. So, you didn't have to do a cash on delivery, but you could pay beforehand, and then there would be several discounts that were applied. We started exploring these. And at the same time, there was also this idea of exploring the fact that for many restaurants, because they faced so much surge in those days, their card machines were not working. So even if you had even if you had debit cards primarily in India, you couldn't use them in many places. And for a lot of these migrants who relied on outside food and facilities, it was something that these digital wallets made possible to still survive in that kind of an economic social setup. So for me, food became a very, very interesting site to explore how the digital and the social intersect. And the positionality of my study itself, the social context, was a very urban kind of India and at the heart of India's capital in New Delhi. The timeline, as I say, actually the kind of thoughts that I had was from demonetization onwards, but I started framing it into a research study from 2019 onwards. And I wanted to explore this relationship between the digital and the social, look at the politics of technology and food by exploring this concept of the ordering in that we call it. One of the ways in which I also wanted to enter the conversation was by looking at this intersection between class and consumption. Now, this is not a new debate by any means, particularly in Indian sociology, where several scholars like Sanjay Srivastava, Leela Fernandez, and Surinder Jodhka have all argued that the middle class in India becomes important and visible once you see the effects of globalization taking shape, especially with the opening up of the neoliberal economy in India in the 1990s. So you could see that the middle class had started acquiring these traits of consumerism, where they spend on movies, eating out in restaurants, and things like that. Now, on eating out, there have been several works, again, that have explored the different dynamics of how food outside home has managed to impact dimensions of caste, gender, and religion, especially. For instance, let me give you an example. In the Indian context, it is generally argued that food plays a big role in maintaining purity and pollution related taboos, specifically when it comes to caste and religion. And therefore, for the longest time, one did not have this idea of or culture of eating out as it had shaped up in many Western countries. However, post globalization, there has been a shift in that, and there has been a rise of restaurants and street food joints, fast food joints all over the country. Now, this not only changed the dynamics in terms of caste and religion, because people, especially in urban areas, became more open to trying new foods and new dishes in these spaces, but also in terms of gender, it gave women a space where they could sort of, go out and eat without having to worry about the cooking part of it, which is very intrinsically again connected to Indian womanhood and ideas of who a domesticated and suitable Indian woman is. So when one thinks about this idea of the middle class and gender and womanhood and domesticity, how does one make sense of ordering in? For me, it was a phenomena that was number one, very, very urban. Number two, very youth oriented. And number three, also had a class dimension, primarily because it meant that you would need a significant amount of purchasable income to be able to order in from outside. Even when we are thinking about discounts or other kinds of opportunities that are allowed to people who are able to order in. So I began my field as New Delhi, and I intended to do qualitative research consisting of these urban upper middle class youth, particularly in the age range of 20 to 35 years. And they have a disposable income in which they are able to spend a particular kind of money on their consumeristic habits. Interestingly, many of these youths were in jobs that paid well, like corporate law, public relations, academia, especially people who were in permanent jobs and well established scholars, specifically, of course, early career researchers, then journalists, media professionals, as well as tech workers who had different kind of jobs in the IT sector. So I used a range of methods: survey, interview, observation, ethnography, autoethnography, and content analysis. I'm deliberately not using the term digital ethnography primarily because it was a part of what I did in terms of the content analysis. I did go through content that some of these respondents shared on their Instagram or on their Twitter or on Facebook, as well as look at some of the groups of which they were a part of, especially on Facebook. Now, while I was using these methodological tools, what also became clear to me was that there was a very different kind of engagement with the field. And I'm making this point because in recent years, there has also been a critique of Indian sociology that there is a need to turn the gaze inwards, which means that we should be reflecting of our privilege as upper caste, upper middle class, or as people who have these social privileges. And what made me think about this reflexive point is that in this study, when we were thinking about ordering in and the benefits that many people sort of talked about, there was not a single point of lament or even thought about the other end of the supply chain, which is where were these orders coming in from? And these were the delivery workers. So there was not much thought given to their conditions, their grievances, the protest that they would have from time to time. So that part of the story never made it into the narratives of the people whom consisted of the main demographic. Now, yes, my study primarily was focused on the consumer end of it, and therefore I have not really delved into the lives of the delivery workers, which many others have, and they have looked at the way that, it's a part of the precarious gig economy that is also a big issue at the moment in the Indian context. Now, I'll go deeper into some of the details and findings from my study when I talk about these intersections between ordering in, class, and consumption. So, very quickly, let me clarify what ordering in means. It actually means using one of these food delivery apps like Zomato, Swiggy, and Food Panda on your phone. Most of these phones will be smartphones and they will have an internet. So again, the demographic which is able to use it is very, very specific. It's kind of a niche demographic, and the context, as I have laid out, is this kind of society in which there is a proliferation of the digital. So during the pandemic especially, ordering in assumed different kinds of meanings, and I'm going to talk about them one by one as I slowly go into the depth of my presentation. But it also meant that some of these old questions of caste, purity, and hygiene were brought back into discussion. As I was earlier stating, that this opening up of the neoliberal economy and setting up of restaurants meant that Indians were starting to go out and eat different kinds of cultures, explore different kinds of cultural senses through food itself. But during the pandemic, some of these questions again came back to the discussion. So, migration plays a very big role when we think about ordering in. And let me give an example to illustrate my point. So, the 2020 performance report of Zomato indicates that there was a dip in the shares of the profit that they made, and the reason they stated is that many of the migrants in these metropolitan cities like Delhi and Mumbai were forced to go back to their hometowns during the pandemic. I'm sure that you will be able to recall that as soon as the pandemic broke out, one of the things that people in hostels and migrants especially were told to do is go back to their hometowns. Many of them, even when they were not told, preferred to go back because living alone, completely landlocked in a way, seemed very daunting. Now, the idea of what you eat at home is very different from what you eat outside. So many of my respondents said that as soon as they went back home, there was no possibility of ordering in, not because there was no Zomato or Swiggy, but because there were preconceived ideas about ordering in. So this is connected to the way outside food in India has been perceived. And many of these respondents were very clear cut in saying that their parents thought of outside food as dirty and unhygienic. In fact, a lot of migrants who stayed back in these metropolitan cities said that even when the food came from outside, they would let it lie for some time, especially because of this fear that the virus might have been, there, and then they would heat it up again, after a considerable amount of time has passed, and then consume it. There were also these reports of pizza delivery persons and Zomato, Swiggy delivery persons being targeted extensively for being the virus carriers. There were several resident welfare associations and gated colonies that did not want the entry of delivery personnel. In fact, one of my respondents said that in the colony that she lived, there were very few single people who relied on outside cooks, because others were mostly families, and the wives or the women of the family did the cooking. But because these were people with jobs, they hired some cooks, and automatically, as the lockdown restrictions were put in, the cooks were not allowed. Domestic workers were one of the first people to be restricted. Therefore there was no option but to order in. And even then the RWAs created problems because the delivery people were constantly tested. They were asked to park their vehicles much farther away and then walk on foot and deliver their orders. So there were a lot of problems that were being created. So what did this was that there were again these assumptions of outside food being non-hygienic and impure just back into mainstream discussions. I'm not saying that these discussions had been over, but there was that possibility of negotiating, which again came back with a bang, so to say. This is also the time when there have been several allegations of food adulteration, mix up in food, and these ideas of how you should not consume food from outside. In fact, the idea of what healthy food constitutes started playing out because of this idea that you could just order food from from a device with one tap, and there it was on your doorsteps. One of these manufacturing owners of a company that makes prepackaged idlis and dosas, in fact, had to do a virtual or the digital kind of show run of his kitchen and tell people that we are not practicing food adulteration, because there was an allegation that there was food adulteration going on in his warehouse or kitchen, and therefore he found it convenient to do this digital run in. So the politics of food and technology sort of highlight and take us back to these ideas that form the bedrock of Indian society when it comes to these intersections with caste and religion. So even when there were these options of ordering in, it was always met with vested concerns and ideas about how it could be bad for health, as well as these concerns about purity and hygiene. Let me also talk a little bit about the impact of ordering in on middle class urban youth in terms of social behavior. And this is something that really fascinated me, especially from conversations that I had with a lot of respondents. Owing to the nature of the qualitative research that I was doing, it was possible to visit some of these respondents again and again, and look at their lives and basically experience the way that they were living in. I had the chance to meet and interview a couple who had recently been married and set up a house, and they did not have a kitchen. So it was one of the most insightful, or rather, opening visits that I had in my field. And the reason that they said that they did not have a kitchen is because of this idea that they did not want to fight over kitchen responsibilities. I remember the husband saying that most often food related work is delegated to the women, no matter how modern and progressive a couple is, and they inevitably end up fighting. So therefore they just eliminated the kitchen from the concept of the household, and they would order in each and everything, including cups of tea and coffee, as much as they could. Otherwise they would just boil it in the kettle. Now, this fascinated me because I could never imagine an Indian household without a kitchen space. In fact, stories of migration to different countries tell us that Indian migrants carry pieces of what they see as Indian food and culture in the form of the pressure cooker or spices. Tulasi Srinivas and Krishnendu Ray have extensively talked about how Indian migrants led to the rise of the packaged foods in the form of these idli or dosa batters or spices, because it was so easy to carry these packaged foods to another country. Very recently we had nolen gur, which is a very famous Bengali ingredient that is used in sweet dishes like payesh or kheer, packaged, and now you can order it digitally in any part of the world. So to me, to imagine a household without a kitchen was something very, very interesting. And when the gender dimension comes in, you also think about that. Does it mean that if you order in food, which is the alternative, it eliminates all senses of gendered responsibilities? And then the wife told me that it actually doesn't, because even when you're ordering in, what you order in, how you eat it, how you put it on the plates, and who does the dishes, these are all things then that the woman has to take care of. So again, when we are thinking about gendered responsibilities, it is very much a part of what we understand as the traditional roles coming back in to these discussions, even when the food is being ordered digitally. Now, to come to other aspects of social behavior, the other fascinating part of the study was for me to understand how young people in India have started imagining food as something that gives them solitude. So, again, when we look at literature on food, traditionally the idea is that eating together builds a sense of community. In fact, when we start reading sociological texts, especially on religion and taboos, one of the things that we are told is that in many simple societies, what happens is that if you eat the food that is being served, especially in their ritualistic ceremonies, you become a part of their own. In fact, this is something that I have been told even now, that in many Northeastern communities, which are still following many of these rules of simple societies that earlier were more of the trend, if you deny to eat their food, they might feel offended, because it's a part of who they are. It's that collective. uh, and the literature that we have at hand has talked about it. Even when we're thinking about restaurants and eating out, the way these spaces emerged is because they fostered this culture of eating together and celebration, that families would go out to celebrate certain occasions. But a lot of these young people said that they would rather eat in silence or alone, and in the company of some form of content that they can consume on their devices. So, this was very striking, because when we think about food in the Indian context, we don't think about being that possibility of eating alone. In fact, if you look at the architecture of our restaurants, also, there will barely be tables which will be designed for one person. We mostly have families and couples. Our McDonald's in India are also mostly designed for families. So that idea of solitude came from the fact that these people were in jobs which were demanding and required long working hours. And they also talked to people a lot. Therefore, they wanted to avoid all kinds of interactions. In fact, many of them also said that earlier, if you would have to order from McDonald's, you would have to unnecessarily speak to the person a lot. And this is the phrase that was used. Whereas when you order through Zomato or Swiggy, you don't have to speak to anyone. In fact, there are also options where you can say, don't call before the address is reached, or don't call at all, and it is the responsibility of the delivery person or the rider to find the address. Many a times there is a possibility of dropping a voice note also. This is actually a very contrasting picture to the demand that delivery riders at one point of time were making against Zomato and Swiggy, that they do not like this option of not calling the customer before delivering the order, because they are very often unable to find the exact locations. And also, there could be pets, especially dogs, which sometimes end up attacking these delivery workers. So, there was this gruesome attack on a Zomato rider by a dog, and after that, when he was hospitalized, the costs were also not borne either by the company or the customer. So, in a way, that not calling option, which is fetishized as well as seen as desirable by many on the consuming end, is actually something that delivery riders were protesting against. So there is again a politics of technology at work here, where you see that there are two contrasting sides of the same story. At the same time, a lot of people also said that eating alone gives them that space to reflect on their day gone by as well as the coming day, and give them that option of consuming content and watching something and relaxing. So in a way, if you see how this operates at the business level, uh, OTT platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime would sell this idea of food and content together. So let me show you this photograph. As you can see, there is this promotion from Netflix, that Netflix and food is a better love story than Twilight. As you may know, Twilight is a series of books that highlight a teenage romance story between a vampire and a young girl. And there is this projection that consuming content while eating dinner is actually a better love story than Twilight. One might wonder and think that how is this different from watching the television and then eating? But when you think about watching the television, and this is not just in India, especially in many other cultures as well, where television viewing goes together with food, it has been a collective act. But in these cases, it's primarily an individual act where you're eating alone and consuming content. So that was the difference in the way that ordering in entered the market. However, this is one side of the story. The other side of social behavior was also about focusing on issues of togetherness and the celebration part of it. So you would see a lot of promotional options on these apps for party celebrations, couple combos, family combos. So it also meant that they were targeting not just the single eater, but also the person who was eating in a group. So these ideas of how the party can take place fascinated a lot of these respondents as well, who said, especially women, that once ordering in became possible, and also, it was accessible to many of us, it became much easier to have people over, because you did not have to do all the cooking and cleaning on your own. You could order the food from outside, not spend a lot of money, as well as have a good time. So one of my respondents said that earlier, when I was doing the cooking, it would mean that I would spend most of the time in the kitchen, because I'm either making hot puris or hot something, because everyone wants to eat hot food in India, as we also know. And I would rather not get any time to spend with my guest. But with ordering in, it has become much easier. Now, the digital has also entered this sphere of life in a much bigger way in recent years, as I can see that there is now an option to also hire a chef through some apps, who will come and prepare a fixed menu for a fixed amount at your house if you have a party or a celebration. So, because of those attacks against ordering in and about the food being unhealthy, as well as, making people couch potatoes, and these debates are going on primarily because, as you know, India is also dealing with the problem of non communicable diseases at a high level, especially diabetes, obesity, thyroid, hypertension. There was this counter that we will send you a person who will cook the menu that you give and the ingredients that you provide. In fact, a few months back, Zomato's CEO also announced that when you try to order certain unhealthy options on Zomato, like dessert, they would suggest fruit salad as an alternate option. Or if you order, or rather try to order butter naan, they would suggest roti as a more healthier option. So the conversations that we are having in terms of the digital, they're very much tied to how the social represents and responds. In fact, there are several ways in which social media, another part of digital technology, has played a big role in bridging this gap between the consumers and the producers, and especially when it comes to consumer grievances. Now, this is also one side of the politics of technology, because for the delivery workers, there is not much hope or possibility for their grievances to be heard. But because the consumer end is the personhood that is, or the target group that is, that is buying and that matters, it is their grievances that gets sort of, listened to in a better way. I'm going to show some more photographs that paint a picture of what it means to be consuming food digitally. This is a tie-up between Zomato and Paytm, where you can see that if you use the Paytm mode of payment, you get a flat cashback of 100 Zomato rupees. So even when we are thinking about digital modes of payment, many a times, rather than the card services, it is actually these wallet services that are promoted more. And there is also this argument that it is easier to use. Again, when we are thinking about promotional content, there is a huge surge of creativity in how Zomato has managed to sort of flood our inboxes. A lot of people are now also talking about how notifications from these food apps feel much more intimate and personal than many people in their lives, because they're constantly messaging us and keeping a check on whether or not we are ordering. So they have all made an entry into how we think about food in terms of popular culture as well. This is one more creative poster of, how again there is this intricate connection between the social and the digital, where food is something that is seen as is seen as something that can replace the idea of love. So, if you see, on the other hand, you have these various images of protesting workers and delivery executives who have their own set of demands, because they are primarily the workers who are working day in and night out to deliver the orders to the other end. And on the other hand, you also have these different kinds of uh, representations from India, where if the delivery worker is from a particular religion or a particular caste, there is a possibility of denying the food. So when we are thinking about the digital, and this question that often emerges, that does the digital manage to blur the social lines or boundaries, the answer so far has been no, because it keeps on recreating those boundaries. So someone cancelled an order on Zomato because a non-Hindu rider was allocated to deliver food. Similar instances have also happened when the rider is from a marginalized caste. So essentially, those ideas keep coming back to the discussion. I'll end with mentioning this one specific narrative in which Zomato had announced pure veg delivery fleets, but then withdrew the decision after social media backlash. The reason that they thought it was a viable idea is because they understood pure veg as something of a culinary choice alone, rather than also looking at the way caste and religion sort of intersect to create that idea of what pure veg means. So essentially, when we are thinking about the digital, I'm again going to sort of reassert that yes, it is an evolving area of research, and one can see that there is an intersection of technology, food, and social life, especially when it comes to urban upper and middle classes in India. But it would be very incorrect to state that digital has become the mediator that blurs the social lines or boundaries, primarily because the issues that we have been dealing with when we think about food and eating in India don't really disappear when we are thinking of the digital. In fact, they come back to the tables in many different ways, taking different kinds of representations when the digital has also been introduced to the discussion. I think I'll stop here, Shruti, and I can take questions or comments or feedback if any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rituparna, for such a thought-provoking talk on the politics of food and its digitization. I think it's a very fertile ground for sociologists and anthropologists now to inquire and explore multiple questions that are emerging. As someone who uses Instagram a lot, I am really struck by the volume and variety of food-related content that pops up on my feed. And one thing that I think this is something that your article also touches upon is the aestheticization of food and how it obscures the labor that goes into preparation, the time
Mm,
that goes into
mm,
preparation. But coming back to some of the points that you raise, it's very interesting to see how demonetization worked in the favor of online delivery platforms and gave a boost to what we call ordering in. And the pandemic, on the other hand, especially in the case of, say, people who were very used to ordering in, went back home, and there was a decline in the Swiggy and Zomato deliveries. It's also interesting to kind of know the kind of meanings young people attribute to ordering in, especially what it does to social interaction. um, it kind of makes me curious about several things, but I think just I limit myself to one question and then I leave the space and time for the audience to reflect. I was wondering if so the cohort that you studied is a particular section of the middle class, and we know that this is a very fuzzy category for sociologists to study. But I was just wondering that while this cohort is more inclined towards ordering in, eating alone, or meeting with friends at home, staying in, and then ordering food, if another change is happening simultaneously, what is happening to the youth among the upwardly mobile groups? Are they seen more in fast food restaurants that are more affordable, like the McDonald's and the KFCs? Do they want to be seen eating in these places, posting pictures of food and pictures featuring themselves with their families or friends? The groups that aspire to enter the new middle class and wants to be seen consuming, or uh, what is happening with this cohort? Is this something that you would like to reflect on?
I think it's a very good question. In fact, this is what I'm also reflecting on in my present research. I was, in fact, thinking about this question about what is happening to rural food, rural youth, as well as the upwardly social mobile in urban areas. And from my limited observations so far, because I've not gone into the depth of it, I won't be making very detailed comments. But one thing that has emerged is that, yes, they are very interested in capturing, be it visually or for social media, the way that they are consuming food. So for them, even today, going to a McDonald's or a Domino's is a moment where they're asserting their social mobility, as well as that aspirational lifestyle where they are consuming food outside and spending a particular amount of money. I think what has also made them being aspirational and easier for them to do Instagram is the possibility of consuming one drink or some kind of dessert in one of these fancy cafes, where spending probably money on a full meal is still not something that they can do, but they can buy a drink and a dessert which looks very good on Instagram. In fact, I had interviewed one of the chefs from the cafe in Radisson Blue in Guwahati, and he mentioned to me, his is the other end of the story, that you will find these young people from not very wealthy families come and spend hours in a cafe ordering one drink and spending so much time just finishing that. And it sort of made me think about the side of the story from the other end also, that why would young people come in and order one drink and sit? It's a combination of factors, like it gives them a space which is air conditioned, which is something that they can sit in, especially if it's hot. So multiple factors give them that possibility of having an intimate personal conversation, as well as also that idea of consumeristic aspirational middle class lifestyle that they do want. The iPhone, in fact, has played a big role in this, and many of these people I was speaking to at a very superficial level all said that the iPhone is something that they desire. It makes them become more rich, upper class, socially mobile. So food, the cafe part of it, the beautiful insta worthy cafes, and the iPhone, two major factors. But I won't read much into it yet because I have not yet sort of been able to do a lot of in-depth research, but I'm hoping to.
Thanks, Rituparna. We can open the floor for questions now, and I invite questions from the audience. If you can just raise your hand. Or okay, yes, Dr. Yasir, you may unmute yourself and go ahead. Kirti, IT, do they need? Do we have to allow them to talk, or they can just unmute and talk?
There are
No,
two
they
questions
they
in the
can
chat
unmute.
box, I think. There are two questions in the chat box. If you can see, Shriti.
Okay. Okay. Can we listen to Dr. Yasir's comment and then take Preeti's and Sakshi's? Yes, Preeti, what were you saying?
They can unmute themselves.
Okay, Dr.
I,
Yasir,
I,
please unmute and go ahead. Yeah.
please, AV team, can you check? I asked you to allow attendees to speak. AV से कोई है?
Okay, I have allowed him. See if you can unmute and go ahead.
हाँ जी मैम बताइए। हेलो।
एवी टीम से रिक्वेस्ट है कि अटेंडीज को माइक का एक्सेस दे दें, वो अनम्यूट कर सकें खुद को।
ओके
Hello,
मैम, ओके।
hello, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
So thank you so much for the webinar on this food culture. So I will directly ask the question to ma'am, as she has discussed about the food and Zomato and all. So my question is, how we can make this transformation equitable across communities which do not have access of digital technologies and digital infrastructures. So could you little bit elaborate on this, ma'am? This is my question to ma'am. Thank you.
I'm not really sure about what he means. Equitable, and for which communities?
I'm discussing about the digital divide, digital infrastructure. So see, we as a no young generation, we know how to access the digital devices. There is a population who are not having such type of facilities, or they don't know actually how to make use of the digital devices. So that's my question.
Okay. Uh, I think it's a larger question, which will require extensive policy input in terms of how to decrease the digital divide. I'm not really sure about what can be done because, as we know, most of the elderly as well as population which would not have proper digital literacy, they will find it difficult when there is a shift to digital modes of communication and payments. And that has happened not just in India, but in many countries across the world. So, this is a question that requires, I guess, much deeper thought in terms of what can be done by policymakers.
Rituparna, should I read out
Yeah,
the questions for you from the chat box?
I'm good. I think I see them.
Okay.
Okay. Right. To first answer Preethi's question, yes, there's a lot of ideas of healthy food now coming up in conversations about food. In fact, a lot of youth have shifted to what they think is healthy food, and specifically the urban upper middle class youth is also co-equating organic with healthy food. So there's a surge of organic food products in the market, different kinds of dietitians, nutritionists who are also prescribing different kinds of healthy lifestyles and foods. Several of my respondents are also shifting towards healthier lifestyles, as they would like to call it, by becoming not just organic, in many cases also vegan. So, yes, that's a very interesting kind of idea that I am also exploring. One of the things that I can sort of add here is how these delivery kind of platforms have also transformed them into home food and healthy food selling platforms, where now you'll find specific categories that say that we are offering healthy food or home food, ghar ka khana, right? So those dimensions have also entered the discussions of the digital. Yes, the question about taste. I think again it's a very, very interesting question because when we talk about food, the taste that one thinks of is also connected to social class, as French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would argue that what you eat, what you like to eat, is not just a question of your biological taste buds, but also your social taste. And for a lot of these urban upper middle class youth, trying different kinds of cuisines from different parts of the world is also something which they find to be fascinating and making them more global and cosmopolitan. So, if you are someone who likes to enjoy different kinds of cuisine from different parts of the world, it makes you a more global, cosmopolitan kind of a eater, which is desirable. So, taste in that sense is constructed through the kind of cuisine that you taste and eat. I see a question by Chiranjit. How do you see the role of technology in promoting sustainable food practices in urban settings? Yes, in fact, there are several examples of successful initiatives in which technology has promoted not just sustainable, but also healthy food practices. Studies from different neighborhoods of the US suggest that if you have supermarkets which sell healthy foods in these neighborhoods which are within walking distances, then the consumption of healthy and sustainable food goes up in those areas. Whereas if you have supermarkets that sell only packaged foods, then the people in that neighborhood end up buying those products because there is a kind of mobility that is involved to the supermarket. So one of the ways in which sustainable food practices can be promoted, especially digitally, is by setting up these marts or organic food stores within the neighborhoods itself. And then people could just walk into those places, buy the products, or even purchase digitally, which makes it even easier to consume sustainable food practices. One question by Kunal. Thank you for the. I'd like to know. Yes, I think again, this is a very interesting question. And especially when it comes to Delhi, one can see that there are different migrant blocks and geographical regional territories itself, which also assert their identity through food. And digital platforms have been used in recent years. For instance, after what happened in Afghanistan, the Afghan refugees in Delhi, especially also incoming refugees, and the burden that was created of people and the possibility of feeding more people, I could see that many of these refugees and migrants started using Instagram extensively to sell their products. So they would use social media to basically say that this is the menu that we have, and you can come and get your order delivered during these times, or we will pack them and keep it in our store. You can collect them from us in those time periods. In fact, there is also this one restaurant owner called Black Rican Vegan, and she became really, really huge during the pandemic just by using Instagram, where she would post her weekly menu, and people would come in at different times, collect their orders from this one small store that she was running, as well as she would use her friends as volunteer drivers to deliver these food items to these residential colonies. And the only mode of communication they would have is Instagram, and the ordering would happen through Instagram, the delivery would happen through Instagram. So what one also sees is that immense kind of trust that now people have on these digital modes of platforms. Although this doesn't mean that there aren't complaints of scams and frauds, which very often also happen, but at the same time, people are willing to trust digital platforms as well. And maybe just a line about the cloud kitchens, especially during the pandemic, in many areas and cities, the cloud kitchens run even by migrants and communities have done a great job in delivering cooked food to many of these lockdown spaces, as well as, spaces that were completely sealed because COVID patients were found. So I think that connect through the digital mode has been immense in terms of making food more accessible. Okay, I have one more question by, okay. Right. I'm not really sure why Indian scholars are not doing enough on digital food. In fact, if you have any insights, maybe we could talk about it. I also feel that probably it's a very new area even today. And for a lot of maybe middle-aged or older people, it doesn't seem like a very viable or interesting research topic. But with the entry of more early career researchers, especially like you, I'm sure that more people will talk more about digital food. So let's hope for the best. And I'm not sure if we are headed to kitchenless homes already, because the evidence suggests that even when we are talking about digital platforms and online ordering, there's also the idea that there is a counter to it, that it's unhealthy, it's non-sustainable. And even in terms of climate change, the argument is that there is a lot of digital and e-waste that is generated, which transforms into physical waste, like all the packaging and the covers. So there are two sides to it. And I'm not very sure about the fact if it is good for women who are responsible for unpaid labor, in the sense that the example that I gave, that who is deciding what to order, how to put the food on the plates, keep a tab on the orders if they have arrived or they haven't. All of these still end up being women's work. So it's very difficult to completely get done with the kind of traditional roles and expectations that exist. But for probably some cases, it does work. Like if you have a guest coming in and you're very sick, you will have the option of ordering in instead of cooking, which just simply did not exist for one generation of women.
We are happy to take more questions. Please raise your hand. And yes, Aditi, please go ahead.
Hi. For some reason, my chat is disabled, so I thought it would be better if I asked Rituparna the question here. Thank you so much for this very insightful and interesting presentation. My question is a bit broad, Rituparna, but I wanted to understand if you had any thoughts on whether the kind of nationalistic discourse and this Hindutva narrative of portraying India increasingly as a Hindu nation, Hindu Rashtra, has a bearing on people's food choices, and how does that kind of map onto the digital?
Mhm. Yes, I think it's an interesting question, and I would say that there is a clear-cut answer in terms of yes. I mean, people's choices are affected because when we are thinking about the digital, it does make knowledge, information accessible, as well as this possibility of raising a voice. So many a times when people find something which they don't like the example that I was giving of a non-Hindu rider being allocated to deliver their food, it becomes immediately possible to say that change the rider. Or when they spot the term halal written anywhere on packaged foods or different kinds of food items, again it becomes possible for them to say that why is halal a part of this kind of food packaging. So I find that with the proliferation of the digital, it becomes much easier to sort of portray these ideas of what food should be and what food should not be. A very recent debate that is going on in social media is if vegetarian diet is cruelty free, and that tweet by someone who said that I eat vegetarian and therefore my plate is free of cruelty was responded to by so many people who said that no, your plate is not free of cruelty, it's actually full of bigotry, as well as farmer suicides and many other ideas. So I think that when it comes to food, the digital has made discussions and debates much more heated. And there is also an option of now saying, don't eat that, don't eat this, considering your own privileged as well as, socially identifiable position. The example that best highlights this is how we look at this debate of eating non-veg during Durga Puja, which is not something which has happened today. Communities in East India, especially Bengalis and Assamese, have been eating meat during Durga Puja for a long time now. But because it clashes with Navaratri, and now in the digital age, everyone knows about the other cultures, or rather finds some superficial information. One can say that this has also become a debate where there are two sides to the story. One side trying to say how we are great because we eat meat, whereas the other side saying, why are you eating meat? So I think, yes, religion and the digital, they have become big ways in which we now think about food. It has also become, I would say, in some ways, maybe a contest where if the other side says something, you also have to say, albeit with very different kinds of social capital and implications.
More questions? There are two more questions on the chat box.
Yeah. Okay, when we think about homogenization or loss of local flavors, it is an old debate in the sense that as globalization started taking off in the frequency that we know, there have been a lot of concerns about whether or not the locals and specifically the minor locals would lose out. And it's not a debate just confined to food. However, as one example from McDonald's itself and the menu that it crafts, shows that the local doesn't really lose out eventually, because if you see the menu that McDonald's has in India and the menu that it has in the US or in the UK or Japan, they're all very different, and they take contingency of the local flavors. For instance, you will not find a paneer tikka or an aloo tikki burger anywhere else but in India. So that's the incorporation of the local at one level, even when we have a mass global entity like McDonald's influencing the markets. The other is that the palette is becoming more and more standardized. That's also a concern that is being raised, because we can see that because of processes like green revolution in India itself, there has been a loss of different kinds of grains and food products from the menu, especially those that have been part of our indigenous diverse food plates. Therefore, what we are also thinking about is how to bring back some of these food items. Because when we are talking about sustainability, and you raised this question about sustainability, one of the things that we are thinking of in terms of food is to eat what is locally grown and available. So this is going back to the question of healthy food. So many of these urban youth say that avocado or blueberry would be something that they see as healthy, but it's not something which is locally grown, and therefore the healthy part of it is something which is also created as part of the capitalist economic processes. uh, on the other hand, when we think about rice, there is now a perception that it is unhealthy, but for many indigenous communities, they have eaten rice and lived fairly well. So there are also these ways in which capitalism influences our thought processes and structures. And I think this is something of a bigger issue that can be dealt with in terms of how we think about eating locally grown food and products. And then the risks of homogenization would also be much lesser. I hope I have been able to answer the questions as best as I could have. I see one more question on role of migrants. And this is again a question that has basically probably led to the also foundation of food studies, in a way that what do migrants do when they move? So they carry bits and pieces of their culture, including food, and then it is this food that reminds them of their homelands. Arjuna Padura uses the term gastronostalgia to talk about how migrants think about their relationship with food. So, for particularly Indian migrants and the Indian diaspora that has now settled in several parts of the world, they look at their connection to the homeland through food. So, the very fact that Nolen Gur could be, was then sold off as a packageable item that could be delivered at any part of the world is reminiscent of the fact that the substantial number of Bengali migrants elsewhere or outside India wants to remain connected to the food that they have grown up eating in some way or the other. So the role of migrants has been that they have taken the way that they see food to different parts of the world, as well as that sense of longing and belongingness which they still feel for food from their own homes. If you go to any country in Europe, the striking fact is that most of the food economy is run by migrant food. So you see a lot of Asian food, which is really, really well loved and very sought after, as well as in a country like Germany, something like doner kebab, which is a combination of how Turkish and German food came together, is a reflection of the role of migrants in not just their food but also in their social economy.
Any more questions for Dr. Rituparna? Okay, I think if there aren't any questions, Rituparna, we can conclude the session.
Sure. Okay.
Uh, thank you so much, Dr. Rituparna, for this really interesting, stimulating talk. On behalf of JGU and Ideas, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation for the time and effort that you put. And we hope to kind of continue this conversation with you. And yeah, I hope we are able to invite you again, this time on campus, for a more vibrant discussion. And thank you so much. And thank you all the attendees for the wonderful questions. Ritwan, I hope you equally enjoyed conversing with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed the questions and I hope I was able to answer as best as I could. And thank you, Shriti, for inviting me. Thank you to Ideas as well.
Okay, thank you. IT team, could you please stop the recording?